Howdy, folks. Hope you're keeping well. Today, we're going to learn some vocabulary with Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan. As always, exercise critical thinking. Let's learn some words together.
I'm not against fighting World War II. I'm not. I'm only saying specifically with reference to Churchill. You can't go to your country, your countrymen, and say, go ahead and die to preserve the dignity of Polish territorial integrity, of the dignity of Poland, the nation of Poland, and then give it to Stalin, and it languishes under an iron curtain. And people.
Okay, the first word of the lesson is languish. To languish means to be in a state of decline. Now imagine someone in prison. Their mental health, their physical health may get worse over time. It may deteriorate. That person is said to be languishing in prison. So he uses this word to talk about how something gets worse over time. And this is to languish. Languish. Let's go back and hear that word again.
Say, go ahead and die to preserve the dignity of Polish territorial integrity, of the dignity of Poland, the nation of Poland, and then give it to Stalin, and it languishes under an iron curtain, and people are murdered and rounded up and tortured to death for 40 years.
But that wasn't what Churchill did.
Yes, it is what Churchill did.
Because he came in after the war started.
No. At Tehran, Potsdam, Yalta, they made a deal to hand Eastern Europe, which he had brought his country to war to protect, to Stalin. There is no getting around the fact that Stalin is maybe the worst person in all human history, but certainly.
When we say there is no getting around the fact that, it means that we can't deny it. This is factual. It's very obvious. And there is no way that we could kind of whitewash this particular fact. So it's a very good informal expression that we use in everyday language. There's no getting around the fact that.
Which he had brought his country to war to protect, to Stalin. There is no getting around the fact that Stalin is maybe the worst person in all human history, but certainly in the running, up there with Hitler. I mean, you could kill more people than Hitler. I mean, they're all evil.
I don't disagree.
So you're in a military alliance with Joseph Stalin? You shut the fuck up. You have no right to lecture me about anything, okay? That's where we start. And that's been sort of elided over the road.
The next phrase of today's lesson is elide. Elide over is to ignore, is to gloss over. So he says that this has been elided over. It's a fantastic term to learn. It has been elided over. People have turned a blind eye to this particular piece of information. Let's go back and hear it.
Alliance with Joseph Stalin? You shut the fuck up. You have no right to lecture me about anything, okay? That's where we start. And that's been sort of elided over. The Roosevelt administration armed Stalin in Languish.
Arm in this context as a verb means to provide weapons. This country has been armed. It has been given lots of weapons, munitions.
Tell me how that's defensible. It's not defensible.
But the question I was asking is
But to hand Poland, which you went to war to protect,
I hear you.
Stalin, like, why doesn't someone answer that question? They're like, oh, we had no choice. Really?
But what my question though is,
then you're a failed leader.
But what would you have done about Hitler?
Well, I would have opposed him, of course.
How?
I certainly wouldn't arm Stalin. I certainly.
What would you have
murdering
done?
Christians and.
No, but what would you have done? I'm genuinely curious.
I have no idea what I would have done. I would have been opposed to him. I am opposed to him. I mean, it's not. So I love this conversation. So it's like there's no way to reassess anything without getting right to. So you're for Hitler, right? Or you would just let Hitler.
No. To reassess something is to go back and examine it again. It's kind of like to evaluate something again. Now we can use the word assess, which means to examine. And when you add the prefix reassess, it means to do it again. So it's a good prefix to use. Reassess, it means to reevaluate.
Rampage through Europe or something.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just curious, if you don't do what Churchill did, I'm curious what you think we should have done.
You act on behalf of your country. That's your job.
Yeah, I think
if you're a theologian, well, he certainly didn't. Look at it. Have you been?
A theologian is a person who formally studies a religion or is committed to the teachings of that particular religion. Theologian. Let's pronounce it together. Theologian. Theologian. So we don't say theologian, we just say gen. Theologian. theology is that formal study of religions. And then we have the person who studies religions, and this is a theologian.
Well, my country,
Yes.
of course. I live in my country.
Oh, okay, right. So no one looked after Great Britain. It ran the world. Now it's degraded. Now you have Sadiq.
Okay, so he is saying that England has been degraded. When something is degraded, its quality is reduced massively. So he believes that England is in a state of decline, that the quality of life, the standard of living, has suffered. It is in a state of decline. Let's go back and hear the word degrade again.
I live in my country.
Oh, okay, right. So no one looked after Great Britain. It ran the world. Now it's degraded. Now you have Sadiq Khan like giving the finger to Christianity in your capital city. It's like, what? This is the seat of Protestantism globally. This is, your king is the head of my church. And anyway, whatever. So it's been a total, there's been conquest, they're vanquished.
To vanquish someone or something is to completely defeat that thing or person. So, for example, you could say that during the Second World War, Japan, when the bombs were dropped, was vanquished, was completely defeated. Vanquish. Put the stress on the first part. Vanquish.
This is, your king is the head of my church. And anyway, whatever. So it's been a total, there's been conquest, they're vanquished, and they lack self-respect. So you have to look to their leaders and say, what decisions did they make that got us to this point? And I really feel this strongly because I think it's a big deal historically. Like, we're going to look back. I don't think England becoming what it's become, they didn't even call it England anymore. I don't think you're allowed to call it England?
You can, yeah.
Yeah, you can. You're not really allowed. You have to throw Wales in there. I don't think you can look at this just as like the decline of a formerly great power. You have to see it in broader terms. This is the end of something really great and important that we should have defended and we didn't.
I would say the biggest problem that Britain's had, but specifically England, is in the 50s we had a population of about 50 million people. All the infrastructure, the National Health Service, which was great at the time it was conceived and great for many years.
To conceive, and it usually goes with the preposition of, is to think of something, to design it. So he says that at the time, the infrastructure was designed in a specific way. At that time, the infrastructure was thought of, was planned in a specific way. So this is conceive, and it goes with the preposition of, as I said, and its noun form is conception. So for instance, the conception of brilliant ideas.
Now just simply cannot cope with a population that's just about 70 million, and is predicted to go in the next 5-6 years up by another few million. And that's just net zero migration up. And I look at that and I think that successive governments, Conservative, Labour, now for 30 years.
Successive is an adjective that talks about how one thing comes after another. So successive governments that came to power one after another in that particular order. Successive governments
have completely failed to protect the country from the impact of massively increasing the population size. And they've not been able to adapt to that. And now what you have is increasing resentment from people in the country to the fact that all the public services are crumbling before their eyes. And
when something crumbles, it collapses. So, for instance, you could say that because of the fire, unfortunately, the building crumbled. It collapsed. Crumble. Let's pronounce it together. Crumble.
And now what you have is increasing resentment from people in the country to the fact that all the public services are crumbling before their eyes, and they are blaming it all on the extra number of people who've come in, which is partly to blame, but probably not wholly to blame. In other words, it almost gives the government an excuse, which is...
Okay, so let's talk about a contributing factor. Piers contends that this immigration, this movement of people from other countries into Britain is a contributing factor to this problem, but it's not perhaps the most important factor. Let's pronounce it together. Contributing, a contributing factor.
We have a big more population, rather than actually successive governments have been pretty poor, pretty ineffective.
I guess. I mean, that's the technocratic explanation for it. And I think everything you've said is true. By the way, there was great resentment in the 1970s, and it was ruthlessly put down.
Yes.
Ruthlessly put down. It's all
Ruthlessly, it means without mercy, without any sense of compassion, very cruelly. It was ruthlessly put down. It was suppressed. It was cracked down on. This was in a savage way, in a wild way, in a merciless way, suppressed. So let's go back and hear that word
I
again.
mean, that's the technocratic explanation for it. And I think everything you've said is true. By the way, there was great resentment in the 1970s, and it was ruthlessly put down.
Yes.
Ruthlessly put down. It's all.
Well, Margaret
drunk-
Thatcher came along and she took decisive action. My point is, it comes down to leadership.
No, it comes down to self-respect. Do you believe that your country represents something worth preserving?
But I think Thatcher did that, you see. And when she went to war...
She didn't. She
Well, I
like
think
took on the unions. Okay, great. That's great. But nobody has reestablished since the end of World War II,
To take on means to oppose in this context. So for instance, if you say that she took on the union, she opposed, she said no to, or she resisted the union. It's a great phrasal verb. It may seem like a very simple one, but it's actually a very powerful one. So to take on, for instance, an army, to take on the troops, to take on the union. Anyways, all the words will be in the description with more example sentences. If you have any questions, by all means, get in touch. See ya.